everyone. Welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I'm your host, Kimberly Cloud. I have a very special guest here for the show today. Can you go ahead and announce to the world who you are and where you're calling from?
Hi, my name is Orion Siebert. I'm currently based in Orem, Utah. Yeah.
I've been through there. I actually stayed in Salt Lake, but I just wanted to say it's not about me. I wanted to say, can we go ahead and dig into your past leading up into your present?
Sure. So grew up in Duluth, Minnesota. So right at the tip of Lake Superior, if you know it. Very cold place. But our family sort of had a rags to riches story of we had next to nothing, everything fit in the back of my dad's pickup truck, and we eventually worked our way up to fulfilling the American dream of 2 kids, a white picket fence, house. It was wonderful. And growing up, I was always surrounded by Legos and drawings, and for some reason, everything just attracted me, and I wanted to create things constantly. Other kids would be drawing like landscapes and drawing wonderful, fantastical animals, where I would sit down and I would be drawing invention after invention and building things out of Legos just to see what would happen and see what could work. And over time, this developed a bit more into a passion for creating and a passion for learning things. I was sort of like the 2-year-old that never learned to stop asking why or to never stop asking questions. And that just continued to help me learn over time. And eventually I started making new projects and picking up new things. Of course, I never did it alone. I had a lot of help to teach me how to use the tools, how to learn new things, how to pick things up. And I was able to make so many different things. I started making musical instruments, started making silversmithing rings and fine pieces of jewelry. And over time, I started to collect all these skills. And I thought to myself, well, what am I going to do with this all? I've been told by so many people, you can go and do anything you want, but that's not super helpful when you can do anything, but everything seems so exciting. And you're always told, go specialize in something, go do this one thing. I didn't want to go and do one thing. I wanted to go explore and try so many things out. And eventually I came across this idea of being a Renaissance man or a jack of all trades. And that led me down this rabbit hole of who are these people that they didn't specialize in one thing. They got good at a bunch of different skills and added them together. And that's ultimately what led me down this path of today I still go out and collect random skills where I go learn how to dance or 3D model or just go learn how to do things that seem fun and interesting. And I take that back and I either go onto my own podcast or I make inventions with it or I write books about it. It's being able to take these various things that I learn about and apply it to my life and help others as well. That's a bit about me.
Wow. Tell me about your inventions, what you want us to know.
Yeah, so currently I'm working on a redesign of a slingshot. I'm not going to go too deep into it just because it's still a work in progress. But essentially, the problem that I'm wanting to solve is that very adventurous travelers typically go out into the world and it might not feel as safe as your home country. You want to have a little extra something with you to just feel a little safer. I had a brother who went to Thailand and constantly, like he was in Thailand for 2 years, and very regularly he would be attacked by dogs or be attacked by wild animals there. And he wanted to have a little extra something to go and fend off those animals just because you don't want to kick them, you don't want to let them get too close to you. So I'm trying to redesign a slingshot that you can take with you safely, that you can use to help essentially protect yourself in these unfamiliar areas that's still flight compliant. That's sort of what I'm going for. It's still very much a work in progress, but it's coming along nicely so far.
Well said. And tell me about your podcast. Tell me about what you do and who you've had on in your podcast.
Sure. So I have a podcast called Cast of All Trades, like Jack of All Trades, but podcast. And it's a show all about developing skills, exploring ideas, and following curiosity, where I'll either bring on expert guests to talk about what they're good at, talk about what they've learned over their years of studying their field. I've recently interviewed a number of a best-selling author who's releasing the 4th book in their quadrilogy. I've talked to millionaire salespeople who are helping me lay out the blueprint of this is how you get good at sales. I've talked to therapists about AI and loneliness and what we can do to get better in our own mental development and all that stuff. And outside of expert interviews, I do my own deep dives of skills that I'm interested in, see how can I get good at these really fast, or finding interesting ideas or interesting questions to say, why aren't we thinking about these things more? It's just a fun way for me to explore weird ideas that maybe just don't come up in natural conversation, but are still really fascinating.
Well said. I have to say this on camera, but I was so scared to interview Will Roberts, and when I did it, I felt so good, like a part of my portfolio was lit up. And we talked about him opening for the movie Oppenheimer, and by the time the show ended, we were really into talking. Like that deserved a 2 to 3 hour spill, but I'm pretty sure I want to totally give you his information, like I said, because I think that you deserve it. On top of that, you've been doing this for a year, right?
Yep, I've been doing podcasting on and off for a couple different years, had a couple different shows. Some failed, some did well, but back into it, loving it, and it's so fun. It's fun to talk to people about what they're passionate about, to see how do you do it, why do you do it, and pick apart their secret to see how can we get better at this thing.
Yeah, and tell me, like, where do you see yourself going in the future with it?
Ideally, I want to do podcasting more full time. I want to find experts in their fields, not just the people that everyone knows about. I want to go find professors or people in super niche areas that they're super passionate about their weird scientific like things that they're studying, but they don't get the chance to really push it out to the world, to the public. I want to find those people and really pluck them out of obscurity to say, I'm giving you a platform to share your knowledge, to share your information with the world. So it's so cool to see what people can really come up with.
I see you. You well said. I see you've done a lot of things. I listened to what you said. You know, you were able to do a lot of good things growing up as a child. And tell me, you know, how was high school? Was it like I just want to know what was Orion doing in high school? You know, to that made him stand out.
So high school is really when I started to like develop this jack of all trades mindset of, oh, this is actually an option. I can do these things. And there's a story in particular that I want to touch on here where it really started my journey. Of this was November, I want to say maybe junior year of high school, where I was sitting on the couch one day, an idea popped into my head. I want to make an electric violin. And there's no reason it popped into my head. Absolutely nothing in particular. I don't play violin. I've played piano for like a decade or more. And I thought, well, people have made violins in the past. Why can't I make one? And that was the entire thought process that went into it. From there, I spent 3 months learning everything I possibly could about violins. I found books, I found articles, I found blog posts, I found videos of people explaining every intricate detail of the violin I could find. I had friends teach me and show me their violins where I could take measurements of it. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just sort of making up as I went along. Then after that 3 months and telling people about it, I spent 3 months finally making the thing. And I found people who were helping me. I had a sort of grandpa figure who brought me to his garage and said, my wife wants me to get rid of all this wood in the garage. Feel free to take whatever you want. So I got free some very nice pieces of wood that I got to use for this project. It was so nice of him for him to do that for me. I had my dad show me how to use the various tools that I need to be able to do it. But it was always my hands-on for the actual project. So over those 3 months, I spent countless nights out in the garage in cold Minnesota weather where there's no heating. It's like maybe 20 below at times. But I was so excited at the end of every day of school to go into that garage and be sanding pieces of wood, to be cutting things up, to be gluing things together. And at the end of it, I had, after many trial and errors, note this thing broke maybe 2 or 3 times before I finally had a completed functional version. And it looked horrendous. It looked like a piece of garbage, but it worked. And that flipped a switch in my head of, well, if I can do this, anyone can do this. And it's being that really pushed me down an aisle, down a road of, well, why can't I just go out and do more interesting things like this? That was sort of the first piece of paper on my stack that said, I can do cool things. What else can I do? That pushed me down this way of, I want to go do more stuff.
That's an amazing story, Orion. You got an amazing name, like Orion's belt. I just had to say that. But you know, Albert Einstein says that the smartest people are those who keep asking questions. What is this about? What is that about? And so my question to you is this. We know that the finishing project you claim looked like garbage. I probably would have tried to play it because I used to play the violin. But what I want to know is, what was the difference that you learned between an electrical violin, and a regular violin?
So the reason I went with an electric violin instead of a normal acoustic violin is because electric violins they're a bit easier. You don't have to make an entire acoustic chamber. There's a lot of math that you can sort of fudge the numbers a bit on. It still works. But many of the differences in it is that, like an acoustic violin, the type of wood really matters. It matters so much. The exact spacing that you have between the top face and the bottom face, the insides, the ribs of the violin matter so much. Compare that to a electric violin. It's more about just getting a rough shape right. You can go from there. It still follows the same principles of how sound is produced, where sound is reverberating through the wood as you play the violin under tension. But instead of an acoustic chamber to amplify the noise, for an electric violin, you have a pickup microphone on the wood itself, so that picks up the vibrations going through the wood and then amplifies that out. So even through this process of learning the differences between like electric violins and acoustic violins, you're also learning about physics, you're learning about acoustics, you're learning about woodworking and craftsmanship. And when I'm tackling one of these projects, I'm not just learning about that project. I'm learning about different principles and different ideas that can be applied to other aspects of life.
You should work with Elon Musk. Like, seriously, if you're out there, Elon Musk, we need him in the building with you. So, let me see. So the electrical versus the acoustics. Let's see. What else have you? Because you went over a couple of other things. Let's dissect that. What else have you done in a jack of all trades?
Sure. So aside from just making stuff, definitely I'm most well known for physically making things. One year for a friend's birthday, it was maybe 2-3 months away. I said to myself, I want to make her a nice handmade gift. What better than making her a nice ring? So I spent a few months.
Go ahead.
I've spent not an engagement ring, just a nice friend ring.
Okay, tell me, how does this ring look?
Oh, it was probably one of the most beautiful rings I had made yet. But it was essentially I learned how to do basic silversmithing, where I took silver wire, I took sapphires, and I started to learn how to bend the wires, how to anneal the silver, how to put it all together to make something lovely. And it took countless hours, and I made it just in time. I was maybe 1 or 2 days ahead of schedule by the time I had to get the finished product out there. And I actually still have my very first silver ring with me to this day. And I like to carry that around with me as a reminder of you can do cool stuff. Outside of that, another fun sort of metalworking thing I do is every Valentine's Day, I like to make custom metal roses for people, where I'll get aluminum sheet metal, I'll bend a bunch of wire to make cool braided stems of brass. Then I'll just give those out to people, because we often think Valentine's Day, go buy some roses for people. But I always hated that, because then you just have someone watching plants die over the next few weeks. Whereas if you hand make someone a metal rose, it's like that can last forever. They can set that up somewhere as a cool centerpiece or something. But yeah.
Have you ever thought about doing like a live segment for the things that you create, like a live segment, showing them how you do it from start to finish, or teaching somebody at a live segment if they say, hey, I don't know how to do this, because obviously you know how to do things that a typical person don't know how to do, like me. So I wanted to know, have you ever thought about that? That would be, people will watch that too, on top of what they watch.
I think about it every once in a while, but a lot of the times my process of going through it is a lot of trial and error, and it takes days, weeks, sometimes months to get through. So maybe at the end I could condense down what actually worked and maybe present that as a blog post or a video of, this is the project I'm working on. Maybe I'm learning how to pick locks today or this week. I go get a bunch of locks and get some lock picks and teach people this is the basics of lock picking. Maybe I could do something like that, but ideas never really crossed my mind. Maybe I would turn it into podcast episodes of, this is the process I went through, this is the research I did, and this is what I came out with at the end. But I'm not sure. Still kind of figuring that out.
What do you see yourself doing, like, that's your baby, other than podcasting and being, because it's something that you're holding back. I can feel it, that you know that you want to add additional thing onto it, like something that has to do with a new invention, or maybe just something, what did you want to do that failed and you may want to come back to later? Something, anything.
I have a dream project that I'm waiting on doing until I have the money and the space. There's a musical instrument. Have you ever heard of a hurdy-gurdy?
No, tell us.
So think of it like a violin, except there's a crank wheel on one end, and it's like you can press the string down, you can press strings down onto it and get like droning notes. And I had an idea of combining this sort of like a wheel idea of like constantly droning notes with a piano, where I can essentially take a giant grand piano. I want to build something underneath it where I can essentially lower down strings onto it, onto some sort of conveyor belt, sort of like a violin bow, to have specific droning notes or droning chords I could have playing throughout the entire piece of whatever I'm doing.
Wow. Have you ever thought about probably, because they don't really have much artificial intelligence music. They have like electrical and every other thing, but I want to hear something that hasn't been heard, something that may be connected to outer space type thing. Like, I don't know. I don't know much about music like you may know. So tell me, what's your input on that, Orion?
Artificial intelligence, like in the music world, sort of that.
Yeah. Anything.
So, yeah, it's something I'm still looking into more of. One of my favorite things to look into currently is artificial intelligence, robotics, biotechnology. That's like a couple other technologies I like keeping the pulse on to see what's going on in these realms. I've seen some cool stuff going on with AI recently. I fell down a weird rabbit hole of AI covers of Frank Sinatra songs, or where they take Frank Sinatra and they're able to use AI to replicate his voice to have him do like fake covers of modern pieces that he was never around to be able to sing. And they're surprisingly good. A lot of them are surprisingly good. So imagine being able to get music from legends of the past for them to be able to sing our modern songs, or be able to sing new covers of new music. Like that fascinates me. Voice replication, that's amazing. It's scary, but also amazing of like just the possibilities of what we can do with this stuff. Technology is always a double-edged sword. You're going to get some good with it. You're going to get some bad with it. I want to focus on the good of it because I don't want to see this stuff go away.
If you get the person that is a good person creating some good artificial intelligence, it would change the world. And my next question to you is this. A lot of people say that we should leave artificial intelligence alone, but my theory, and then I want to know your theory, is with anything, you catch a cold, you get a virus, and then what happens? You get sick and you get over it. But with a computer, you get a virus and then something bad happens to that computer. You may have to shut it down indefinitely or get a virus protector. Like with these new humanistic artificial intelligence robots like NVIDIA is carrying and Tesla is carrying, it would not be a bad thing unless somebody will take a virus and put it in them for them to act bad.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So what is your theory on the future of artificial intelligence, Orion?
Oh boy, that's a big one. So the way that I look at it, I love the idea of open source projects and open source technology. What you were talking about is very closed source technology, where it's companies are working on stuff. To the rest of the public, it's a big black box. We don't know what's going on inside. We don't really understand it. On the other hand, there's also a lot of open source and artificial intelligence groups coming together where they create open source models that are free to the public. Anyone can look at the code. Anyone can look at what's going on in there. And a lot of open source projects outside of just AI, since there's a lot of open source software out on the internet in general, everyone can look at the code. So it becomes much more difficult to hide viruses in that. It becomes much more difficult to attack that, because even if you have bad actors or bad people who want to hack into these things, you also have a bunch of good people who like this software, who like these things, also looking at what's going on in there. They can see everything that's happening and they can see, oh, this looks like it could be a point of entry. Let's harden up this firewall here. Let's make it harder for people to breach here. It's having this, there's always a play to it, since the tools that allow people to be good actors in the AI space or in the technology space, they're the same tools that allow people to be bad actors. You have good hackers who break into things to make firewalls better. We also have black hat hackers who break into things to make things more difficult, for people. So,
wow. I didn't know that. You taught me something. What is up with the name Orion? I am interested in the stars and planet. Your mother is so special for creating this name for you.
I have to give props to my dad for that one. My parents had an agreement that their kids, my dad can name the boys, my mom can name the girls. Of course, she had to give approval. I was going to be named Thor, but that got pushed off the table for some family reasons, interesting reasons for that day. But the name Orion is a name that's been passed down through history, where you had Orion the Hunter, the constellation worshipped by peoples all throughout the world, where you had the Greeks worshiping it, you had the Aztecs. People worship the stars, and Orion the Hunter, there's an interesting story behind that. Like,
Go ahead.
if you want interesting mythology, look into that. It's super cool. But it's also a way for me to look up at the sky and say, I'm always watching over you. I'm always watching over people. And just as an aside for me, it also helps fuel my personal God complex, because I know that there's a giant constellation that I'm named after up in the sky. So,
wow. Can you
also,
tell us, because I don't know the story behind the Orion story, because I know that I think the pyramids in Egypt, the 3 pyramids line up with Orion's belt, the stars, and the story kind of went, I think I learned a little bit where the gods, they connect to those pyramids. It's like a energy source or some sort, and they came down and they created those pyramids, and they come to visit every now and again, or something like that. I'm wrong. Am I?
The pyramids in Egypt, some of them are aligned with Orion's belt, if I'm remembering right. Don't quote me on that.
Okay.
But one of the most known stories of Orion the Hunter is that he was the only man to catch the heart of the goddess of, like, the Greek goddess of the moon and of the hunt, Artemis, and he was the only man who could capture her heart. And over time they grew close, and one day Orion was struck down by a poisonous scorpion, but Artemis didn't want to give up on him, so she took Orion and she placed him up in the sky. She placed him in the stars. That's the quick story of it.
That's beautiful. How do you feel innovate? Because you're an innovator. You're under the category of innovator. What do you feel that you may innovate for the future that will possibly get headlines and reach and help millions, if not hundreds of millions of people? Because I can tell what type of person you are, and I know you have it in you.
I've never really thought about it, but I think my main impact would be a lot of small changes. Most inventions, most things that we have today are built on the backs of small changes, one small change at a time.
Yeah.
For example, the phone. We went from, like, many people would say, "Oh, that's a pretty big change," but we went from we went from like bag phones where you had to throw them in the back of your car to home phones to, so eventually over time we went from home phones to mobile phones. They were all right. They were clicky keyboards. Eventually we went to the iPhone, and we just kept on going. But if you really look at each of those small changes over time, like, we develop with very small changes at rapidly increasing paces. If you look at the development of technology in the past 100 years or so, about 100 to 200 years ago, 98% of people lived in rural countries, like lived in rural areas. They worked the farms. They worked like out in small towns. That was life. Look at today, where you have maybe 0.5% of people are working on farms, working in rural life, because of how fast technology is developed with small iterations over time. So I think that might be my place in the world, to be contributing to those small, individual little innovations. Maybe I'll come up with something big, but I don't know yet. We'll just have to wait and see.
Wow. Oh my God, that is beautiful. Tell me one last thing. You have the floor for 2 minutes. You can say anything you want to. I open the floor to a lot of great people, and I want to open the floor to you to just talk about whatever that's educational.
Anything that's educational. There is a concept, there are a couple ideas that I personally think everyone should develop. And one of these ideas that I think is very lacking today is this idea of nuance and critical thinking. We're so quick to jump on headlines, to jump on social media, to blast out ideas, and it's hard to give space for the nuance in them. For example, Twitter gives us 140 characters to share an idea, something like that. You can share some very cool ideas that catch on very fast, but you lose a lot of nuance to it. I was talking about this with a professor recently, and we came to this idea of, it's easy to hate a group in collective. It's hard to hate an individual. People often slander or disgrace other groups because, oh, they're different, they're not like us. But when you sit down and talk to an individual, it's hard to hate them. You get to know them. You get to see their flaws. You get to see what's great about them. You get to see what makes them tick. it's easy to connect with people. You always find something. There's always something you can connect with someone over. And by being able to connect with people, by being able to see that, oh, this big group over here that we said they're the other, they're the people that we can't agree with, that group is made up of individuals, with individuals you can agree with. They may have ideas that you don't necessarily agree with, but if you can take a step back and think from their perspective, what's their worldview? What makes them believe this is the best way to do it? Develop your critical thinking skills. You're going to be able to understand people better, connect with people better, see why are these people doing these things, the things that they are doing. Because trust me, like people will do, if you can predict someone's worldview, or if you can understand someone's worldview, it becomes so much easier to communicate with them. You understand where they're coming from. You understand why they're doing what they do. And it makes so much more sense. People living in small towns are typically more conservative. Their worldview makes sense to them because of the worldview they were brought up in. People in cities are typically more progressive liberal. That worldview makes sense there. But people who don't consider the opposite side, they don't consider where they come from, it's hard for them to understand that. Both sides are right and both sides are wrong. It just depends on where you're coming from and what the situation is. So critical thinking, nuance, and leaving space for disagreement.
Oh my goodness. You got your bachelor's degree, right?
Yep, I just did.
What in what?
In business management.
Cool. And what about going back for your master's?
I've had so many people say I should go back for my master's, so I really don't want to.
I understand. You know what? The hardest part is getting your bachelor's. So I commend you on that. It's nothing wrong with that. And my next question is, I found out through the news that Bill Gates was buying farmland, which is taking farmlands from the real farmers that's been here for. I'm not downing them, but I want to know your interpretation, because he planned on building vegetable plants or some type of plants that make meat plants that have, it's going to be fake meat plants that have basic chemistry that's not like the coated regular meat that we're used to eating. Tell me what's your interpretation and what you know about that.
Some people put on their tinfoil hats and do conspiracy theory stuff and say World Economic Forum, big business is coming to get us. They're going to say we can't have the normal meat anymore. We have to have the oh, what is it they say we have to have the bug sandwiches is what a lot of people will call it. And I think maybe there's a lot of cases where I don't have enough information and I'm not going to take a stance on it because I personally don't know. It could be a very smart business decision. It could be that a lot of people are predicting that there's going to be a big war. There's going to be like big things happen. Maybe it's a way of hedging his funds. I don't know. I could look more into it, but I've heard bits and pieces, so I'm not going to make any comments that I don't know enough about.
I always do that to people, and I hate when I do that. But here's
it's great. It's great.
The thing is that maybe he just don't want to nobody slaughtering more animals. Maybe and I feel him on that. It's always a reason why higher ups do what they do. But I hate you to have to leave. But how can the people reach you?
If people want to reach me, I have a Twitter, Orion Siebert. LinkedIn is probably a good way to do it. If you want to see more of what I'm doing, Cast of All Trades, wherever you get podcasts. I guess probably the best way is I have a link tree. So linktr.ee/Orion Siebert, where you can see everything I'm just up to date doing.
Thank you, Orion. Stay on the line. You all take care. Thank you guys for watching my show. You guys take care. Be safe. And I'll see y'all in a little bit to edit a video. Bye.